Okay, so this is the progressions you can take to get to a pigeon pose and do so comfortably. We start with a shin box or a 90-90 position where you're on your side. All the legs are at 90-degree angles, so your front hip is facing forward and the knee is bent at a 90-degree angle. Your back leg is off to the side and bent at a 90-degree angle. A couple things you can do at this point to make the exercise a little bit easier. The closer you slide your hand at your side, so in this case my right hand, the closer I slide that right hand to my side, the more vertical my torso is going to be, the harder it is going to be able to hold that position. So if we need to take a little bit of a stretch off, we can just slide that hand out further and further away from our side. A couple other options you have, depending on the leg that is uncomfortable for you. If it's your front leg, you can offload the front leg a little bit by elevating the knee or giving it a pad. If you can't rest that knee down flat on the ground, this is probably a nice option for you just to make it supported. Same thing with that back leg. If that back leg is a little bit uncomfortable, then you can support it with a pad. And again, sliding your hand out away from your body is a nice supported position for this 90-90 shin box pigeon pose. This works both hip internal and external rotation. As we get better at this position, we want to try to work a little bit more active mobility into it. So what I'll often do is just support myself with the one hand by my side and take the opposite elbow and drop it down to the floor. That takes my sternum towards the lead leg knee. And we're just going to repeat that for 5 to 15 reps or desired time period, generally from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Once this becomes easy for you, then you can take it up a notch and we go to the actual pigeon stretch itself, which is simply keeping the front leg in the same position, but now straightening that back leg out. Now, I'm less concerned about how low you sink your butt down to the floor, and I'm more concerned about how much you turn your back leg and your back hip towards the lead leg hip. So in this case, my right leg is the lead leg, so I'm going to be turning my left hip towards my right knee, and that's really going to wind up the piriformis, wind up the glutes that you're trying to stretch. I see the mistake that most people make is they try to get their hips as low as they can to the floor or get their chest all the way down to the floor. That's not the intent of the exercise. Sure, you could get there over time, but first and foremost, we want to make sure that we line the pelvis up in the right position so we actually get into the hip and into the correct musculature to get the desired effect. So again, making sure you turn your left hip towards the right hip in this case, because my right leg is the lead leg. And then from there, you go down into a depth that you feel comfortable. And I prefer to keep a vertical torso because the next progression to this exercise is to then try to support yourself isometrically in this position. So previously we were using our hands to help support this position. Eventually I want you to turn this into an active isometric where you have to build strength in that outer range of motion and be able to hold yourself in that position while keeping your vertical torso. And you're going to actively use your glutes to maintain integrity in that position. So that is the final challenge of this exercise, is being able to isometrically hold the exercise without any hand support. And as you can see with the accentuated arch in the low back and the excessive amount of forward lean necessary, I'm not quite ready for this particular position just yet. Now there's a nice middle ground version of this exercise, which is where a lot of people will end up staying depending on how far you really want to progress with this exercise. So you can simply elevate that front leg on a bench. This makes the exercise a lot easier, a lot more feasible for many people, and a lot more controllable from that hip rotation standpoint. Again, depending on which leg is my lead leg, if my right leg is the lead leg, I'm going to be turning that left hip into that right hip in this case. And then from there, it's a matter of how far do you feel comfortable sinking down while keeping that slight rotation towards the lead leg active. Again, we can use our hands for support to support this position, and then eventually we want to try to progress to that isometric position where we are not holding or not supporting our body weight with our hands. We're actively having to push down into the bench with that lead leg to make sure we don't just collapse. And that's isometrically developing integrity in those outer ranges of motion, develop strength, capacity in those tendons so they become less likely to get injured and hurt in some of those extreme positions that you might get into with the hip as part of your daily life or in sport. Now, height of the bench, it matters a little bit. I find most benches in a gym work pretty well. At home, a lot of times I'll have people just perform this on the bed. The bed is a little bit higher. The higher the surface, the more elevated the surface is, the easier the exercise becomes. So just be aware that the more you work your way down to the floor, the easier it gets, which is why the pigeon pose flat on the ground with full rotation and no support from the hands is the final progression to this exercise.